Let me take you inside a federal courtroom where the air was cold, the judge colder, and the truth had been sealed away for years. Judge Leonard Grayson ruled that room like a king in exile, untouchable, unquestioned. But on one morning in Boston, someone unexpected walked through those doors. Not a lawyer, not a witness, a president, unarmed, unshaken, and carrying more than evidence. He came to unbury what power tried to erase. What happened next wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. And it started with 7 simple words. I'm here to restore what you buried. 8:59 a.m., Federal Court of the Eastern District, Boston. The air inside Courtroom 4A felt heavier than usual, thick with reporters, human rights observers, and the faint buzz of Channel 8's live stream rig quietly blinking to life. Protesters outside clutched handmade signs. Justice for Henderson. Truth belongs in the record. Security was already pushing them back beyond the courthouse gates. The side door creaked open. Judge Leonard Grayson entered. He didn't acknowledge the gallery. No nod, no greeting. Just the low click of his polished shoes and the hiss of his robe brushing the floor. He held a coffee mug in one hand, disdain in the other. Without looking up, he barked, "Thermostat stays at 66. Anyone cold can bring a coat." Catherine Lang, the court clerk, jumped slightly. Her fingers trembled over the keys. Grayson's gaze landed on her. "Ms. Lang, if your fingers fall behind, I'll find someone who has 10. The message was clear. Emotions were distractions. Comfort was weakness. And no one, absolutely no one, questioned his court. Out front, the Channel 8 news anchor Monica Reyes leaned into her mic. "Law on trial just got real," she whispered, the stream catching the cold fluorescent glare of the courtroom. On the prosecution bench, federal prosecutor Ronald Becker sat poised. Crisp shirt collar sharp as a scalpel. He barely looked up as he flipped through a stack of exhibits. Victoria Henderson exploited charitable donations for personal gain, he began, eyes flicking toward the defendant. Victoria Henderson, a poised black entrepreneur in her 50s, stared straight ahead. Her lawyer, Eli Shapiro, silver-haired, quiet, rose and adjusted his glasses. "Your Honor," he said, "we intend to prove not only her innocence, but also who's been silencing the truth." Grayson smirked. "Another fable, Mr. Shapiro?" Then, the doors opened. Every head turned. A tall, dark-skinned man in a plain white shirt walked in alone. No entourage, no fanfare, just presence. Whispers rippled. "Is that President of Burkina Faso?" Grayson didn't hide his scorn. Another idealist from the global south. The man didn't flinch. He simply set his leather satchel on the table and looked up, voice calm but sharp as steel. "I'm not here to argue titles, Your Honor," he said. "I'm here to restore what you buried." Something shifted. A few in the gallery sat up straighter. Catherine Lang paused mid-keystroke. Monica Reyes blinked toward the camera. The room didn't warm, but it listened. Eli Shapiro rose slowly, a calmness in his posture that didn't match the electric weight in the room. "Your Honor," he said, lifting a folder, "we'd like to submit Exhibit A." Traoré, silent until now, gently removed a document from his satchel and placed it flat on the evidence table. No theatrics, no raised voice, but the gesture cut through the room like a scalpel. Grayson didn't even glance down. "These documents were never filed," he said, dismissive, leaning back as if swatting a fly. Traoré didn't raise his voice. "Page 47, he said evenly, "stamped March 15th, filed by your office." A shift in air, barely perceptible but undeniable. Camera lenses swiveled toward the clerk's desk. Catherine Lang's fingers had frozen above her keyboard, her face pale, eyes fixed on the surface in front of her. Her hands, once moving with quiet speed, were now stone. Grayson turned toward her. His eyes weren't cold this time, just unsure. Lang didn't look back. She swallowed hard. Something in her silence made the gallery hold its collective breath. Shapiro cleared his throat. "We also request a judicial review of the sealed ledgers from the Henderson Trust." "They're sealed," Grayson snapped, louder than necessary. "Under my authority." Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "That authority ends," he said, voice smooth as frost, where truth begins. Monica Reyes, reporting live from just outside the courthouse, whispered into her mic. Documents previously declared missing are being submitted under Grayson's stamp. The hashtag Grayson Unmasked blinked across the screen. Then, Traoré Truth. Justice in scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, something shifted, not in volume, but in alignment. The murmurs grew, not frantic, but thoughtful, a weight recalibrating. People weren't just watching anymore, they were listening. Grayson's knuckles whitened around the armrest, his jaw flexed, but the mask was slipping. Lang sat in stillness, caught in the eye of a storm that now had a name and a timestamp. Loyalty wavered, conscience stirred. And Traoré? He didn't move, didn't gloat. His eyes didn't accuse, they revealed. Without shouting, without slamming, the quietest man in the room had just pierced the strongest armor the system had. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply slid a set of printed photographs onto the evidence table, each one sharp, time-stamped, undeniable. Taken last Thursday, he said quietly. Liberty Garage, Level 3, 11:47 p.m. Grayson leaned forward, his eyes scanned the first photo and twitched, but his mouth still moved with stubborn confidence. Coincidence, he scoffed. That's nothing. Traoré added another photo, this one larger, more damning. 7 men in suits, all currently seated federal judges. One of them, Grayson, at the center, looking directly at the camera. You want the names, Your Honor? Traoré asked, not unkindly. Grayson's jaw clenched. His hand hovered near his gavel, not to strike, but to steady. Catherine Lang sat frozen at her desk, hands clutched tightly in her lap, lips pressed white. The room wasn't hot, but a bead of sweat rolled slowly down her temple. Outside, Monica Reyes stood in front of the courthouse steps, eyes fixed on the feed in her earpiece. Her voice cut through the live broadcast. Breaking update, multiple sealed cases now in question, public confidence shaken. A wave of noise erupted from the growing crowd. Henderson deserves the truth, someone yelled. Then louder. Then a chant. Inside, the silence returned. Shapiro inserted a small USB into the courtroom's audio system. A soft click. Then, I don't care what the file says. Burn the Henderson records. I said burn them, Lang. Gasps. Chairs creaked as bodies shifted. All eyes turned, not to Grayson, but to the clerk's desk. Lang rose slowly. Her hands trembled as she clutched her elbows. He threatened to ruin my life, she whispered, her voice cracking. Said he'd blacklist me from every court in the circuit. And then she broke. Tears spilled freely as she covered her face, sobs echoing in the chamber. Someone in the gallery muttered, he's been untouchable for years. The pause. Not anymore. Grayson slammed both hands against the bench, the echo cracking through the chamber like gunfire. He shot to his feet, eyes wild. I am the law. He expected fear, retreat. But Traoré didn't flinch. He stood tall, eyes steady, voice like iron laid flat. No, he said, you were meant to serve the law. Somewhere along the way, you forgot. Silence, sharp and sudden. Then a click. Another recording began to play. This time the voice of Grayson murmuring to Prosecutor Becker, keep him out. This African thinks he can rewrite our rules. The air drained from the room. Becker froze in his chair, face pale, jaw clenched. He didn't speak, just slowly looked down, as if the weight of what had just echoed off the walls settled squarely on his shoulders. Whispers rose, not shock, but recognition. Disgust. The murmurs weren't about Traoré anymore. They were about Grayson. Catherine Lang lowered her head and quietly wept. One of the associate attorneys leaned over to whisper to another. Their eyes never met Grayson's again. A juror from the observation row stood abruptly and walked out. No one stopped him. The room had stopped being a courtroom. It had become a reckoning. Outside, Monica Reyes received a buzz in her earpiece. Her eyes widened. She turned to the camera, her voice solemn. Confirmed. The International Judicial Oversight Team is now en route to Boston. Estimated arrival within the hour. The announcement ricocheted across live streams and media tickers. Hashtags like "Truth at the Bench" and "Troy Reeves the System" flooded social media, surpassing 5 million mentions in under 15 minutes. Inside, Grayson's posture stiffened. He looked around, first at the jury box, then at the press bench, then up to the marble walls that once made him feel immortal. There was no exit. Behind him, the statue of Lady Justice loomed tall, blindfolded, scale-balanced, sword drawn. But now, she no longer looked like an ally. She looked like judgment. And across the courtroom, Ibrahim Traoré simply stood, calm, grounded, with a gaze not of fury, but of revelation. The doors of the courtroom opened with a hiss, letting in a cold beam of light that cut through the stillness. Every head turned. Special Agent Aaron Walker entered, her navy suit crisp, badge gleaming, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She didn't pause. She didn't waver. She walked straight to the center of the room and unfolded a sealed envelope. Her voice was clear, steady, and carried the weight of an international mandate. "Judge Leonard Grayson," she announced, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit judicial fraud." Gasps rippled through the chamber like a current. Grayson recoiled as if struck, his face contorted, first confusion, then fury. "You can't do this," he barked, spittle flying. "I have friends in high places. You're making a grave mistake." Traoré remained seated, hands folded in front of him. His voice, calm and unshaken, was almost too soft, but it cut deeper than any shout. "Your friends," he said, "are being detained across 7 districts as we speak." The air left the room. Grayson's bravado shattered. He sank back into his chair, like a marionette with its strings severed. His gavel slipped from his grip and hit the marble floor with a dull, definitive crack. The sound echoed, more like a closing door than a courtroom tool. Catherine Lang, the court clerk he once threatened, stood. She didn't speak. She didn't look back. She walked past the rows of stunned observers, tears streaking her cheeks, but for the first time, her posture was unburdened. Free. Outside, the buzz of media peaked. Monica Reyes from Channel 8 turned toward the live camera, her voice thick with disbelief and resolve. "This is not just a takedown," she said. "It's a turning point. Justice didn't arrive in robes today. It walked in, steady and unarmed." Online, the internet ignited. The gavel breaks, Trelevs Grayson, truth on trial, all trending, all rising. Grayson, desperate now, shouted into the void. "You can't stop us all." Traoré met his eyes with quiet defiance. "No," he replied, firm and unwavering. "But someone has to start." The final hearing for Victoria Henderson was brief. No protests, no objections, just a verdict as quiet as it was powerful. The newly assigned judge reviewed the record, then looked up, voice steady. "All charges dropped, evidence restored. This court offers its formal apology." Victoria didn't break down. She didn't cheer. Instead, she reached for her son's hand and pulled him close. He wrapped his arms around her and they stayed like that. 2 figures who had survived something unspeakable without ever shouting. Outside, the storm had already spread. The front page of the Commonwealth Times carried a single headline in bold serif. When truth entered the courtroom, the robe cracked. In the days that followed, the Massachusetts state legislature convened an emergency session. They passed the Traoré mandate with overwhelming support, a sweeping law requiring all sealed judicial materials to be publicly disclosed in both civil and criminal cases at the state and federal level. The bill also created the first independent Judicial Accountability Bureau, an oversight body operating outside the courts. The ripple became a wave. Channel 8 Boston aired a primetime special titled "Law on Trial, A Nation Listens." Footage from the trial went viral. Traoré's voice, steady and calm, became an anthem for truth. Former colleagues of Grayson were subpoenaed. Cases they once sealed were reopened. Survivors began speaking out. Boston became the epicenter of something America hadn't seen in decades, a genuine reckoning in the justice system. And through it all, Traoré never held a press conference. On the final morning of the trial's aftermath, he stepped out of the courthouse alone. The sky above Boston was overcast, but the air felt lighter. He wore a simple wool coat and a felt hat pulled low. No entourage, no podium, just silent. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message glowed on screen. "Your words reached my courtroom. Thank you." From a young judge in Traoré smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet relief. He looked ahead, not to bask, but to pass the torch. The camera pulled back, tracking him from behind as he walked across the empty plaza. No applause followed him, no reporters called out, just the soft sound of footsteps and the wind picking up. Then the screen faded to black. White words appeared. Some courtrooms silence truth, others finally listen. In the end, courtrooms aren't defined by wood and marble, or the titles etched into brass plaques. They're defined by what we choose to hear and what we choose to silence. Justice doesn't always arrive in grand speeches or swinging gavels. Sometimes it walks in quietly, carrying truth in its hands, daring power to listen. And when it finally does, everything changes. Not with noise, but with clarity. Because the law isn't sacred unless it serves the people. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think a little deeper about what justice really means, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and hit subscribe. Your voice matters here. Let's keep the conversation alive, one truth at a time.